Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Laura Prada from our Telesur studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with our news. You stay with us. We begin in the Caribbean, in the Dominican Republic, following the suspension of the elections. President of the Dominican Liberation Party, Temístocles Montas, has accused the opposition of being responsible for boycotting the elections.
El Partido Revolucionario Dominicano,
the Dominican Revolutionary Party, the Free Action Party, the Popular Democratic Party, the Christian Democratic Union, and the Pending Revolutionary Party, and others elect sectors announced in front of the national and international community that what was happening in the municipal electoral process convened this Sunday in the Dominican Republic was an act of sabotage. We had warned that different opposition sectors have been undermining the reputation of the Central Electoral Board as they have worked to discredit and rig this election as it has happened.
And the Dominican Liberation Party also criticized the Central Electoral Board for suspending the elections.
We disagree with the decision of total suspension, because if the problem was limited to places with electronic counting system, then we think that the rest of the municipalities using manual counting should have been allowed to continue to exercise their voting rights, as it was communicated to the Central Electoral Board by our Secretary General.
And the president of the Fuerza del Pueblo Party, People's Force Party, Leonel Fernández, and former president denounced the irregularities presented by the automatic service voting system during the municipal elections this Sunday.
Unfortunately, those measures that apply anywhere in the world where elections are held with automated voting were not, however, adopted in our country by the Central Electoral Board, neither in the primaries of the 6th of October nor for the municipal elections scheduled for today.
Fernandez also demanded that the failure of the automatic voting system did not disadvantage the government's party, according to his statement, and we'll hear it right now.
Al iniciarse la votación,
when voting process began, problems started to come. Incongruities and irregularities were spread everywhere, in different ballot papers from different sides. The voting polls of opposition were absent. In other cases, candidates were excluded, as in some other, the images of the party and the candidates were dashed. Finally, the great number of irregularities conduced to an electoral disaster. The only party which has not affected by none of these unusual circumstances, it was the government's party.
All these reactions came after the electoral authorities called off the elections due to the malfunction of the electronic voting system used in parts of the country. Manual voting has also been suspended. According to the president of the electoral body, Julio César Castaños, several parties had denounced the irregularities that excluded thousands from voting.
Since last night, the Electoral Authority started installing the voting tables, and the automatic system already warned of inconsistencies, that each of the ballots in those voting centers had errors, and in half of the centers the tally was incomplete. And we tried all night to correct this mistake, and without a complete tally for all parties, we can't have an election.
And we change topic. We move to Bolivia, where relatives of the victims have marked the 3-month anniversary of the Sacaba massacre, calling for justice. Relatives and friends of the victims paid tribute to the 10 people who were killed during clashes between anti-coup protesters and police forces in the Cochabamba department last November 15th. Demonstrators took to the streets near in Sacaba to condemn the right-wing-led coup against now former President Evo Morales. They were met with heavy police repression, which resulted in 10 deaths and dozens of injured. And we move on to Venezuela, where the Bolivarian National Army have successfully completed the military exercise called Bolivarian Shield 2020. Let's hear the sounds.
We have complied with the orders issued by our Commander-in-Chief, Nicolás Maduro Moro, which has to carry the exercise Bolivarian Shield. We have completed 95% of the tasks, and we are finalizing the execution phase of launching an automatic missile from the missile frigate Almirante Luis Brion F-22 station.
And from Latin America, we move on to the Middle East. The Israeli Air Force has carried out strikes in the besieged Gaza Strip. Local media reports say fighter jets and helicopters on Sunday evening bombed several sites south of the city Deir al-Balah, causing damage to homes and public buildings. The Israeli military claimed that the raids were in response to the firing of 2 projectiles from the besieged enclave. No injuries have been reported so far. And meanwhile, Israeli security forces on Saturday attacked a group of Palestinians who attempted to remove a barrier that blocked access to their village in the occupied West Bank. On Wednesday, Israeli soldiers put up barriers across several roads in towns and villages to the north and west of the city of Ramallah. Israel severely restricts Palestinians' freedom of movement through the use of approximately 100 fixed checkpoints, mobile checkpoints, settlers-only roads, and other physical obstructions. We have updates about the coronavirus. Chinese health authorities have continued to make progress against the COVID-19 outbreak. On Sunday, the National Health Commission announced a 10.5% reduction in the number of new confirmed cases in the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak. The Commission said this is due to stronger prevention and control measures implemented by the government. The virus has infected more than 70,000 people and killed over 1,700 since it broke out in late December.
By midnight February 15, the severe cases in Wuhan, Hubei province, and nationwide have all seen a decline in terms of the proportion. In Wuhan, the peak, 32.4%, appeared on January 28th, and this proportion has been reduced to about 21.6% on February 15. In other cities, Hubei province, the peak, 18.4%, appeared on January 27th, and this percentage has dropped to 11.1%.
And like this, we go for a first break here from the south. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Tulsa English and on my account at Laura Pittelser. We'll be right back.
The toughest sanctions ever imposed by us on a country.
The aim, ask the United States what the aim is.
are back with our news. Social organizations in Colombia are calling for a de-escalation of tensions between the government of Iván Duque and the largest remaining guerrilla group, the ELN, the Liberation National Army. The call comes after the guerrilla group announced a 3-day armed strike, mainly in the northeast of the country. What it's about and why there is so much confrontation, we found out on the following story.
The National Liberation Army guerrilla, ELN, has a presence in at least 5 regions of Colombia and a strong influence in the departments of Arauca, Chocó, and the north of Santander, areas in which there have been some acts of war, burning of vehicles and a public transport stoppage after this organization announced a 3-day armed strike.
I think this strike is maybe the most important political act of the ELN in the last decade because it has had a huge impact and dimension. The President and Defense Minister have spoken about it. The people in the cities are worried. The strike that started on Friday morning and is going to go on until Sunday evening. About 30 vehicles have been banned in some regions of the country.
Terminación inmediata de todos los beneficios otorgados a ellos en el pasado por el Estado y la activación de las circulares rojas de la Interpol.
The government of Iván Duque declared the talks with the ELN to be broken after an attack on a police school in the capital in Bogotá in January of 2019, an event that entrenched the position of the executive that has always been against the peace talk.
Indeed, the politics of the government of Duque has no room for peace with the ELN or with other guerrillas movements. It will take political pressure by citizens to make him change his policies, including the inconsistency in applying the terms of the peace agreement with the FARC. But at the same time, President Duque never gave viability to the dialogue agenda that was built by the previous government.
Social organizations are demanding that stakeholders find ways for the restoration of the dialogue between the guerrillas and the government to protect civilians who are the most affected by the conflict.
Estamos soñando.
We are dreaming of seeing the end of the conflict, but we are not seeing it happening because there is a breakdown of dialogue between the government and the National Liberation Army. But we are really concerned by the decision of the armed strike of the ELN. As civil society, we see such moving further away from the possibility of dialogue, and we are mainly concerned because we don't see political will from the government or the ELN.
At the moment, the ELN peace delegation is in Havana, Cuba, awaiting for direct dialogue with the government, which insists on imposing conditions, a strategy that, according to analysts, is unattainable.
And from Colombia, we move on to Chile, where protesters have continued to take to the streets demanding for social change despite heavy police repression. Protesters that were initially sparked by an increase in the subway fares last October have turned into a broader movement demanding for reforms to healthcare, education, and the pension system. They also demand a reform to the constitution, which dates back to the military dictatorship era of Augusto Pinochet, and also the resignation of President Sebastián Piñera. 31 people have died at the hand of security forces, and more than 10,000 were arrested since the protests began.
People say, why you go there? Is that I come to breed humanity, to breed union, to breed hope that the 118 days we have been coming to this, we have been here 118 days, since we realize everything. And as you can see, we are not faltering.
And hundreds of human rights activists have demonstrated in Mexico against violence on women. The protesters gathered in front of the presidential palace in Mexico City, calling on the government to investigate cases of gender violence. The activists also demanded a probe into the recent murder of a young woman in the capital. Meanwhile, the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has assured that his government is concerned about violence against women and warned that perpetrators will be punished. We keep moving on. Hearing from the South, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for de-escalation and diplomacy in resolution of tensions between India and Pakistan over Kashmir and Jammu after he arrived in Pakistan for a 4-day visit.
Clear that we have taken a position about the need for Security Council resolutions to be implemented and for effective de-escalation and dialogue linked to that. with another very important condition, which is full respect for human rights and continental freedoms in Jammu and Kashmir. In relation to the ceasefire, I visited Unmojib. We believe that Unmojib should have full freedom of movement. It has on the Pakistani side. We hope that this will also be achieved on the other side. And we will be strengthening its equipment capacity in order to better be able to implement its mandate.
Guterres also reiterated his call of an inclusive peace process in Afghanistan while praising Pakistan for sheltering Afghan refugees and also act as a mediator between the United States and the Taliban.
Pakistan continues to play a crucial role in realizing this potentially historic opportunity for peace. And the United Nations remains committed to supporting an inclusive and Afghan-led peace process that upholds the human rights of all citizens and leads to a sustainable peace in Afghanistan.
And Syrian government forces have made significant advances in their military offensive against the last major rebel bastion, taking over at least 23 villages west of Aleppo. According to state television, the Russian-backed forces have liberated all the villages and small towns west of Aleppo city. The latest advances come after government forces drove rebel fighters from the key M5 highway linking Aleppo to the capital Damascus and reopened the fastest route between Syria's two biggest cities for the first time in years. And Togol's incumbent president Faure Gnassingbé, who also seeks another term, has put the fight against terrorism on the top of his campaign agenda. During a Sunday rally, incumbent President Faure Gnassingbé have stressed the importance of preserving peace and security, but also to keep up with the fight against religious extremism and terrorism. Togo will hold presidential elections on February 22nd.
We've always been a quiet region, but since 2012 and the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, Mali fell into chaos, and since then, terrorists keep spreading.
Security is good because, why do I say that security is good? The Aleppo shares a border with Burkina, Ghana and Benin, so I think that at this level the security minister does its work. It's been decades since we've learned that there were jihadists in Burkina, but at our level we're close to Burkina, but we haven't detected any yet.
And South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, has condemned claims by former President Frederick de Klerk that apartheid was not a crime against humanity. As we were talking last week, the African National Congress said de Klerk's conduct is an attempt to whitewash the brutal apartheid system. Last week, de Klerk claimed that the classification of apartheid as a crime against humanity by the United Nations in 1973 was part of an agenda by the Soviet Union and the African National Congress to stigmatize white South Africans. Moving on, relatives of the victims of Sudan's Darfur War have welcomed the decision by the transitional government to hand over former President Omar al-Bashir to the ICC to face genocide and war crimes charges. The families said the handing over of al-Bashir to the Hague-based court is a victory for the victims of the brutal war. Al-Bashir is facing 3 counts of genocide, 5 counts of crimes against humanity, and 2 counts of war crimes perpetrated by government forces and allied militias during the Darfur War between 2003 and 2008.
The handing over of Bashir is a victory for the victims, a victory for all the Sudanese people, and a warning for any other person to not repeat the same actions.
And Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has denied reports that he intends to resign. He said he will remain in office to serve the mandate that the Iranian people have gave him.
My resignation does not make much sense. We have made promises to the people, and we will continue to fulfill those promises, despite the economic situation and pressure from the enemy. I would not even let the government leave its responsibility an hour earlier, not a month or a week earlier.
And now we go for another short break. We'll be right back.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursday, only on FtS World.
We are back with our news. Tunisian Prime Minister Elias Fakhfakh on Saturday managed to form new government after several failed attempts. But he immediately hit a major snag after members of the Ennahda party pulled out of the coalition. Fakhfakh was appointed 2 weeks ago and tasked by the president to form a government. Ennahda, which is Tunisia's biggest party, said it will only join the unity government if the party of the defeated presidential candidate Nabil Karoui is allowed to join.
Despite our efforts, one of our main partners, I'm talking about Ennahda, decided this afternoon, an hour before the announcement, to withdraw from this government formation and not to give its vote of confidence at the parliament, because Tunis is not part of it. This places our country in a difficult position.
And Burundi's main opposition party, the National Freedom Council, has nominated its leader Agathon Rwasa as its candidate for the upcoming general elections. Rwasa, a former rebel leader, and will be facing ruling party candidate Evariste Ndayishimiye, who was chosen by the ruling party after the current leader Pierre Nkurunziza was forced by protests not to seek another term in office. Rwasa was the leading opposition candidate in 2 previous elections but boycotted the 2010 and 2015 polls, saying there was too much repression of his supporters.
Let's go to the election. And if there are those who think they are more important than the others, we ask them to respect what the Burundians will have voted, because the path of a high-ranking officer in the army is equivalent to that of a minister, an unemployed person, a herder, or a farmer.
And South Sudan's President Salva Kiir has announced a key peace plan set to end the country's 6-year conflict. President Kiir said the country was reverting to the former turn-state system, which was a major demand for the country's opposition and the main cause of the conflict. Opposition groups welcomed the move and are set to meet with the president to finalize a new deal. The country was originally made of 10 states, I must say, but the government later increased them to 32, a move which ignited fighting in Africa's youngest country.
This decision was reached by the presidency after weighing several options, and we thought this latest compromise will preserve the unity of the country and move the people of South Sudan out of this imposed, senseless conflict, which has affected the livelihoods of many of our citizens.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says U.S. government officials are spreading lies against his country. Speaking on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, Yi said the United States has failed to accept the Asian giant economic success.
The root cause of all these problems and issues is that the U.S. does not want to see the rapid development and rejuvenation of China, and less would they want to accept the success of a socialist country. That is not fair. China has the right to develop. The Chinese people have the right to live a better life.
And so have hundreds of people protested in the German city of Munich against the ideals of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The protest took place in the silence of the Munich Security Conference, where Wang Yi spoke, an annual gathering of world leaders to discuss security challenges. The protesters condemned the conference, describing it as a meeting of people obsessed with war and arms dealers.
I want to demonstrate against the NATO Security Conference, and especially against this political tendency to spend more and more money on military security, instead of investing in social areas like healthcare and education.
And like this, we come to the end of this brief. Remember, you can find this and much more other information on our website, HelloStarEnglish.net, where you can read opinion articles, watch special interviews. Of course, do follow-ups to the most outstanding information happening in the world. You can do follow-up to the coup d'etat in Bolivia. You can find more news regarding what's happening in South Sudan, and much more other information that you can follow up there. So the invitation is made. You continue with us with Telesur, always together, connecting our global thousands. Next time, thank you for watching.